Okay. So I'm gonna wait for a little bit till folks start. This is literally the only video I've ever done, so I have no idea what the heck I'm doing. Had I known, I probably would have been able to like actually schedule things and get things set up a bit ahead of time so people could have figured this out. Um, yeah. So what is this class about? Um, strings. Okay, so uh, Toramassa's Dealing with Difficult People is a class I've been teaching for years now. Um, Mundanely, I work as a therapist, have for a lot of years now. I teach a class on parenting, anger management. I work with kids who've been abused, neglected. Um, I work with sex offenders. I do trauma work, do a lot of different stuff. Um, and so a lot of this class is based on stuff from those experiences, from that work. And it's really the original impetus, the original idea behind developing this class was to find a way to help people reduce the amount of conflict in the SCA. And that's really the goal here is to reduce the amount of conflict, resolve more problems so that things can move better. So in the SCA, I am Kitajiro Toramassa, Corp Baron. I've been a Seneschal of my local group twice. I was Kingdom Seneschal, General of the Army, Autocrat of a lot of events, done a bunch of stuff. Um, and hopefully you've been able to find the handout that basically is going to go through all the stuff I'm going to talk about. Um, and that should be on the North Shield discussion in the files section. And I am not sure how to see if anyone asks a question or anything. So you might just have to like ping me on Facebook or something. Um, or if you ask a question here, I'll see if I can't address that. Okay, so defensive people. Or I'm sorry. First, I want to start with the truisms. So these are things I've just found, generally speaking, to be true. The first is that defensive people are lousy listeners. Whenever we get defensive, we start feeling that urge to protect ourselves. We stop listening. Ears shut down, nothing happens. And so one of the things I've learned is that when you're working with folks, when you're talking to folks, when they start getting defensive, recognize you're not going to make any progress. Like they're not going to hear what you have to say because they can't. They're busy in self-protection mode. By the same token, if you're talking to someone and you go, "Oh, I'm getting really defensive all of a sudden," recognize that you're not going to hear what they're trying to say. So you have to pay attention to that. The second one, perception trumps reality. And this is something I've done for a lot of years talking with couples that I work with. And the idea, basically speaking, is that what I see, my experience of the world, is the world for me. That is reality for me. And I see a lot of people arguing with, that's not what I said, and that's not what's going on. Like, when you start arguing about what reality is, you're not going to get anywhere. People, you have to sort of listen to what the other person's saying and go, oh, okay, so you're seeing it this way. I see it differently. And so, like, one of the things I'll tell folks is what I heard you say is, or what my understanding is, or something like that. Because when you can own that this is what your experience is, it's a lot easier for them to go, okay, that's what you heard, but that's not what I said. Oh, that's not what you said. What did you say? Because that's what I heard. And that really, like, that is a rant for a different topic or later. Number three, fear is a greater motivator than want. Look at the world anymore. People are hugely motivated by fear. And a lot of that's just the way human beings are put together. We don't want to get hurt. So we work to avoid things that we think is going to hurt us. Now, one of the things that means that when you're dealing with difficult people, one of the things I usually ask myself is, what is this person afraid of? Because I stand really good odds if someone's being difficult, it's because they're afraid of something. And if I can figure out what it is and reassure them about whatever the thing is, they're probably going to be a lot less upset and a lot easier to work with. Um, Number four, people like to feel included. Human beings are social animals. We want to be part of other people. We want to be connected. Being socially isolated is terrifying. It's one of these fundamental core fears about human beings have. So trying to figure out how to include people, how to bring people in is important. It's not always easy, and it's not always something we can sort of readily do. But the more we can do it, the better the better it works. Um, the next one, people are doing the best they can, and this is one of these fundamental things. Everyone's doing the best they can with what they have at the moment that they're doing it. And so, like, we have to give people a break sometimes, or recognize that that's part of what's going on. Like, if you're trying to talk to a fighter right as they're coming off the field, that's maybe not the best time to try to hit them up with some really difficult question or something really emotional. Um, have to recognize that, you know what, if you're having a real hard time right now, like, have I been drinking water? When was the last time I ate? How did I sleep last night? Because that might be a lot more going on with what's causing your own reactions than that the other person doesn't like purple or whatever the color, whatever the thing is. Life is hard, and recognizing that we're all making the best choices we can, given what we know, what our emotional state is, our all these other factors. We do the best we can. Um, Words that I don't like, and there are two words I really don't like. And I just encourage people to remove them from your vocabulary. Um, should, ought, not useful words. Um, the I tell people, don't should on yourself. Should is about setting a bar, right? Things should be this way, they ought to be this way, and anything less than that is no good, doesn't count, not good enough. And so it sets you up where either you meet expectations or it's garbage, and there's no in between. If you replace should with prefer, this is what I'd prefer to have happen. If I get 80% of that, that's not too bad. It's a B, but room for improvement. Um, the other issue with should is it sort of creates this alternate reality where, like, you got the timeline, and then I should be over here in this different timeline, but I'm stuck here. And there's nothing you can do to get to that other timeline where the thing that happened in the past happened. Again, I would prefer to have this outcome so it sets something in the future you can work towards. Why is another word that I don't like. The problem with the word why is it tends to put people on the defensive. It's useful if you're like a chemist or an astrophysicist or a philosopher or something, but for most human beings, it's not super useful. Why requires justification. You have to defend what's being asked of you, where why is an explanation. It's oh, well, this is what's going on. Why did you choose that persona versus what made you choose that persona? Comes across way differently. And so one of the things that I work very hard at is to not use the word why. It, what is or why is vague. It's unclear. Um, where what forces me to be specific? What forces me to ask a better question? And when I ask better questions, I get better answers. So hopefully that makes sense. Yes, hello, Ken. We're getting some feline help. Um, so what is it that makes people difficult? The first thing is that there's something they're afraid of. People who are afraid stop thinking real clearly. They're really motivated to avoid whatever the feared outcome is, whatever they think it's going to be. So they have a real hard time thinking clearly, and they tend to get stuck on whatever they believe is going to solve their problem and get them to whatever that desired solution or end state is. Two, there's something they don't understand about what's going on. Um, Again, if I think that this is what the plan is, and then suddenly, like, we're driving to an event, and suddenly you turn left, and I'm like, why are you turning left? What that? Because I thought we had, and I had in my head, like, oh, here's this thing, but you were on Facebook and you saw, oh, this road's closed, take this route, and like, but I didn't know that. I start freaking out because I'm like, what the heck's going on? Um, Third thing, they have goals that are counter to yours or different than yours. Um, and sometimes that's understandable, and it's not even when I say they have goals counter to yours. I imagine that some people think about like, oh, this person's evil, they're bad, they're like, but it just might be that they have different priorities. Um, I'm a heavy fighter. I look at a practice site, and one of the things that's run through my head is, how well can I fight in this? Um, Fiber artist looking at it might say, is there a sink so I can do felting? What's the electrical capacity of the circuits? How many sewing machines could we run here? We have different goals of use of a space, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we can't work it out, but we have to be aware of our different ideas, our different goals. They have a different history or experience with a situation. And you'll often, like, I see this a lot in groups when they're having a meeting and new person says, hey, we should have a bake sale. And everyone in the group's like, no, no, we've done that. No, that's a bad idea. But the new person's really excited about their new idea. Old guard's like, yeah, I know, we did that. That was a really bad idea. Now, doesn't say anything about the particular idea or how to resolve it. But that's part of what you want to pay attention to. Is this I'm reacting because I have some experience that this other person doesn't? And then sometimes there's external factors. There might be something else that's going on that isn't readily apparent. So it might be person is going through a divorce or has other personal issues that are showing up. Could be that they're getting pressure from kingdom level or from the bod or from a site owner or from their peer, or like there's other pressure pushing in that's affecting things that isn't necessarily immediately obvious. And the last thing, when you're like dealing with someone and they're being difficult to pay attention to, Dan Savage has this quote about, if every relationship that you've ever been in, the other person's been a jerk, you want to think like, oh, what's the common factor that connects all those different people? Oh, it's me, right? So there might be something in you that's causing that problem. Um, I know for me, there are some clients that I work with sometimes that I'll start having this real strong reaction, start getting like defensive and sort of ornery and like pushing back. And it's because they're coming across as a bully to me. And that trips stuff in my past, in my history that I don't react well to. So you got to pay attention to that stuff inside of yourself. And I really wish if I could figure out if anyone I don't know what that button oh, that's the share button. Okay. So I have no idea if anyone is saying anything or not. So I'm going to just kind of assume you're not because I can't see that you are. Well, hopefully I'll be able to answer all your questions. So compassion. So compassion is the important thing that I talk a lot about. And compassion is more than just like caring about people and like I hope things work out for you. It's about understanding pain. It's about understanding suffering, and what understanding the suffering and pain that someone else is going through, and then using that to reduce conflict. Um, people, compassion isn't a forgive and forget. It's not about that. It's about being able to sort of put yourself in someone else's shoes and go, you know what, I get how difficult that might be, or I get how important this is for you. Well, let's try to figure out a way to make this better for you. Um, putting things in perspective. So oftentimes in situations we have like stuff happening. Like if we're in a group meeting, say, and we've got some conflict going on. People are upset because there's like two different plans. Um, one of the things we want to do is first identify what the actual like issue is. Um, so maybe it's like, oh, we can't have the event this year because well, coronavirus. We can't have the event this year. So we have to first identify what the actual situation is, because it's not uncommon for people to start reacting to what they think the consequences of the event is, rather than to the event itself. So we have to go, okay, so what is actually going on right now? What is the thing? And then we want to list what are the worst case scenarios, what are the best case scenarios, and what are the most likely case. So, we go, okay, so we're not having an event. Well, what's the worst case scenario of that? Shire runs out of money and we shut down. Best case, we hold the event next year or later this year and people show up and it's great. Most likely case, we don't have the event. We have to maybe pay attention to our budget and change some things because we don't have the money that we were expecting to have. And then you want to make plans to deal with most likely case. You go, okay, so we don't have the event. We probably won't have this income. We probably won't be able to have the event. So how do we deal with that? How do we make plans to manage that kind of financial shortfall? So dealing with criticism. So when someone says something, and attacks us, how do we deal with that? And so, for example, if someone were to say, "John, you're an awful therapist," or an awful knight, even. I'm getting distracted. YouTube says apparently live chat is disabled on my thing. So you guys are just going to get this as it is, I guess. So I'm just going to power through and we'll do this. And then I'll try to answer follow-up questions later. So dealing with criticism. So someone says you're an awful person. Or let's say someone says, John, you're an awful person. Well, first thing I want to do is go, okay, well, hold on. Putting hands up helps kind of slow things down. It's sort of a universal please stop. Want to remind myself that's only one person's opinion. I don't need to take it personally. I don't need to take it, and make it a big part of who I am. The next thing that's really hard and super powerful, super helpful, is to get more information. Someone says, John, you're an awful person. Oh, okay. What makes me an awful person? What is it about me that makes me an awful person? I don't get it. Now, they're going to say one of two things. Either A, they're going to say, you make these lousy YouTube videos, and you're not a great, two-weapon fighter, and, like, they say stuff about stuff I could do differently, right? I could figure out how to do it better. It stops being about me, and it starts being about things I could do better. Or they might say, like, "You're a cis white male, and I don't like you because of that," which is a silly reason, but let's pretend. Well, I get to go, "Well, I'm sorry you don't like that. That's what I choose to be, or that's what I am. Um, so you don't get a vote in that." So it's either something I can do something about, or it's something that they don't get a vote in. Either way, it splits around me. Couple things we can also do. We can do the next three tips are increasingly powerful but decreasingly useful. Um, so the first one, clouding, is just trying to find something in what the other person's saying that you can agree with. So, for instance, they're like, "You're wasting all the Shire's money." You're right. The Shire has been spending more money right now, or I agree with you. I don't think it's a good idea to waste the Shire's money, or it probably does seem like we're spending a lot of money right now. Right? It's not super powerful, but it can help. It's hard to sort of be upset with someone who keeps agreeing with you. So you try to find something in what they're saying that you can agree with. Not necessarily the whole thing, not like, "Yep, I'm an idiot," but find something in there that you can agree with. The second is more powerful, but it's less useful. That's the assertive preference. And that's something you can do when the other person doesn't get a vote. So someone says, you Japanese shouldn't be a persona in the SCA. Like, you shouldn't be able to do Japanese. It should all be Western Europe and 14th century. Woo. Um, well, you can go, "Well, I'm sorry that you feel that way, but I'm going to do Japanese." Then you don't get a vote, right? It's great for that. It doesn't work. You walk onto the field and go, "I don't feel like wearing a helmet." And the marshal's like, "You need to wear a helmet." And it doesn't work there. Um, The last is the content process shift, and this is a really powerful technique, but it's difficult to use. And what you have to do to make it work is you have to understand something about what's going on. Now, that might be understanding that there's something going on behind the scenes for the other person. If a friend of yours is getting super pissy and upset, and you're not sure why, and they're like, "Rah, rah, you suck," and you're like, Is this because of I didn't pick up 2 Diet Cokes like you asked, or is this because, like, you're going through a divorce, or your kid's sick, or, like, something else is going on?" So if you know something else is going on behind the scenes, you might be able to make some guesses there. Um, the other option is that you sort of do this thing where you take the covert and you make it overt. You say out loud the unstated stuff, and you go, "You're really upset about my not bringing the soda, but, been a lot of times I've forgotten soda, and you haven't yelled at me. Like, it seems like there's more going on than just I forgot the soda. What else is going on?" So if you can pull it off, it works really well, but it can be hard to do. So next technique for dealing with conflict, dealing with difficult people, is being focused on active listening. And so active listening is this process where we really pay attention to what the other person's saying, and we want to listen to that. So there's a couple sort of tips, ideas about what you do. You want to show readiness by doing things like nodding and going, "Yep, uh-huh, okay." So the nods, the ahas, comments that you're like, "Yeah, I can understand that." That where you validate the other person's feelings or thoughts is helpful. You can paraphrase, which is saying things back, repeating what they've said, but in a slightly different way. So price of gas is too damn high. Like, yeah, I understand. It's really upsetting when they charge so much for gas. Um, Something like that. What's powerful if you do that well is you talk about their feelings instead of what they said instead of the facts, the surface level stuff. So they're like, "Gosh darn these you know rapier fighters," and you go, "Wow, you sound really upset about that," rather than like, "Yeah, rapier fighters." Um, I really hope I'm not offending anyone. Anyway, um, and then you can kind of do some summaries at the end. Um, so when the person has talked for a while, like, okay, so what I've heard you say is that this is going on, and you're upset about this, and you're worried this is going to happen, and that can really do a lot to resolve issues all by itself. Because there's a lot of people who are upset because no one's actually listening to them. They don't feel heard. And so when you do stuff and you listen to them and they feel heard and understood, that can often resolve a lot of issues just right away. And if it doesn't, it moves you towards getting to there. So another thing you can do is ask open-ended questions. So tell me more about the problems in your shire. Tell me more about what's been going on the heavy field, or tell me more about so description, like what has been going on, how is this going on, what's going on, please explain or tell me about, describe, um, can help. I The last option on this thing is to give an opinion, and usually I try it's advised that you do that with caution. And part of it is, if people aren't asking for advice, they're usually not interested in getting information, getting advice, and people will resist that. Now, one of the things I will do is, before I give anyone advice, I'll say, "Hey, would you like some thoughts, or would you like an idea? Would you like some feedback?" And if they say no, I shut up. I'm like, "Okay, cool." They almost never do that. Usually, what happens is I say, "Would you like some advice?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I go, "Okay, well, here's what I think is probably a good idea." And since they've already, like, consented to the advice, it doesn't feel like I'm trying to force it on them. Um, and so it's a lot easier for them to take that in because they asked for it. When you're doing active listening, good eye contact's important. Pay attention to your body posture. So, sitting with your arms crossed tends to come across as kind of judgy. Um, Usually you want to be more leaned forward. That shows more that you're sort of paying attention, nodding, smiling. Um, Clearing your mind can be one of the things people do, is that when one person's talking, what's often going on in my head is just trying to, like, plan what I'm going to say next. And if I'm planning what I'm going to say next, I'm not actually listening to them. So that's where some of the, like, rephrasing and paraphrasing comes in, because it actually forces you to actually listen to what they're saying, because you're like, okay, I need to summarize what this person's saying. So you actually have to listen to what they're saying. One of the things, and this is a message especially for males listening to this, is you want to be attentive to gender dynamics, which is a really fancy way of saying pay attention to how you interact with women. Um, and what I mean by that is, for guys, it is usually very easy to not pay attention to how intimidating and physically sort of imposing they can be. Um, and so that means things like, don't stand over and sort of tower over another person, generally speaking, but definitely not a woman, because that makes people feel really uncomfortable. Don't block doorways. Keeping your hands sort of in a relaxed posture is important. Um, and this varies from person to person, obviously. But I have worked and known a lot of people who are trauma survivors, and how I hold myself is super important. The tone of my voice is super important, because if I'm not doing those things well, they start reacting to that, and they become defensive, and they stop listening. Um, so hopefully that all makes sense. So some roadblocks to effective listening, things to pay attention to, emotional interference. So our own baggage can get in the way. So someone starts talking about, the great pasta incident of '83, and you start getting really upset because that was a hurtful incident in your history or whatever. Um, have to pay attention to that because that emotional activation when you're starting to feel those strong emotions is going to keep you from being able to actually participate. Defensiveness, again, when we get the sense that we're being attacked, we stop actually paying attention. We have to deal with that. We have to deal with our defensiveness and own that. Hearing only facts, not feelings. I see this so much with clients I'm working with. When you pay attention to only the facts, you miss the feelings, and feelings are the motor that drives everything. Everything is driven by emotions. And so, like, it's easy to sort of get stuck on the facts and, well, he said this and this is what's good. Yeah, yeah. The feelings are what's moving things. The facts are secondary, maybe tertiary, like they, at least in terms of dealing with difficult people, are often immaterial to how we resolve the problem. Um, Not seeking clarification. One of the things I tell my clients usually on the first session is that I thrive on specificity. I really enjoy specifics. Now, part of that is because I don't like making assumptions because you know where assumptions lead. They don't go to good places. And so by getting people to be specific and asking them specifically, like, what's going on? Tell me more about this. What was this like? What was this incident like? That helps me get a better sense of what's going on. Um, and I really try not to let things go vague because lots of people will slip lots of things and like just kind of vague it out and hope that the other person doesn't pay attention and then they don't actually have to say the thing and like no, I want to say the thing, I want to be specific because it just like I said, it saves me a lot of time. Hearing what's expected instead of what is said, and this can tie into something called the halo effect. um, and so sometimes we expect things out of people. And sometimes that's to the good, sometimes that's to the negative. There have been situations in my group where there's someone who was not particularly well liked um, coming into the group. And it might be that they're like returning or they're for whatever reason there's conflict between them and other members of the group. And so, they come in and they say, I like ice cream. And people are like, what does they mean? What do they mean by that? What do you mean you like ice cream? Like, right? What have you got against cake? Right? They start expecting that this person is going to generate conflict, even if they're making a very neutral statement. And they sort of turn that statement, whatever that person says, into conflict, and they become conflictual about literally nothing. And the halo effect is when that new person who comes in who's got all that conflict, they bring someone with them. When that person says, I like chocolate sauce on my ice cream, we go, oh, these cake haters. And we get so upset about this person because, well, they came in with them. So they must have the same problems that this person has. Um, Something to pay attention to. Stereotyping, when we start sort of expecting that, oh, they're a fencer, they're going to be like this. And sometimes it's really obvious like that, and I don't mean obvious in that fencers are all like. I mean that we have assumptions about who people are. And sometimes those are obvious assumptions like, oh, fencers are going to be, and sometimes they're subtle where we sort of make these unconscious assumptions about what's going to happen. And then again, we get that you're listening for what's expected instead of listening for what's actually being said. Um, Automatic dismissal. There are times when we assume that because a bake sale has never worked, it's never going to work. So someone suggests a bake sale and we go, nope, and just dismiss it. Um, resistance to change. So we don't want things to be different. And so sometimes when things really it would be better if things changed, we fight against that and we push against it. So moving practice from Wednesday nights to Thursday nights, I resisted because I had built my life to build it. But it worked better for more people. So we now have practice on Thursday nights. Um, so some ways to now we're going to get into some of the ideas for reducing conflict. Um, the first is this diffusing technique. Um, the other person might be angry. They come into a situation armed with a number of arguments, um, and so this other person comes into the situation, and they're ready to fight, and they're ready. And you're going to do that. Like look for things to agree with. That clouding principle. Um, and you just try to find ways to get to agree with them. And part of the idea there, what you're trying to do is simmer them down a bit. Because really, really hopped up people who are really sort of keyed up for a fight, they're if you try to argue with them, they will get a fight. It's hard to argue with someone who keeps agreeing with you. So you want to try to do that to simmer things down to where you can actually start talking about the problem, if possible. Empathy is another good tool for dealing with the conflictual people. Um, and it comes in two basic flavors. There's thought empathy and feeling empathy. Thought empathy is where we're going to give messages, or we try to understand what they're saying. Like, I get that you're saying this, or that it's really important that this happens, or you really like cake and you're a big fan of cake. Um, feeling empathy is, it's really confusing. You sound like you're really hurt by this, or you're really scared that, ice cream's going to do this horrible stuff, or I can understand that you're pretty upset with me, stuff like that. Exploration. So again, people who are coming into the situation looking for a fight, one of the things that we can do to help de-escalate them is to ask questions. Like, and here's the thing when we talk about asking questions, you cannot be sarcastic. You have to be genuine. You have to genuinely want to understand what's going on with them, what's going on with their situation, with their issues, with their anxiety, with whatever. If you can't do that, asking questions is probably going to make things worse. Because if you come across as sarcastic, what the other person gets is, I'm just laughable. Like you're not interested in listening to me. You just want to laugh at me. But if we can genuinely ask questions, be like, so tell me more about this. Like, when did this happen? I really want, that helps people feel heard and understood. And when people feel heard and understood, it's easier for them to understand others. And so we have to get them calmed down, get them simmered down a bit before they can actually move on to that. Using I statements. And I'm having a little bit of dissonance with what's in my thing here, because it talks about, I feel pretty upset. And one of the things that in more recent years I've been working on is recognizing that I feel is not a great way to express emotions, because generally speaking, I feel ends up being followed by a thought rather than an emotion. I feel pretty upset. I could probably just say I am pretty upset. I don't need the word feel in there. I can just say I'm upset. Um, but one of the keys is we want to be very clear about taking responsibility for our thoughts, our feelings, um, our perceptions. And part of that is that when we come grounded from that place of, I think this is what I have seen, here is what I have heard. If we're getting it wrong, the other person can go, oh yeah, I get that you're seeing that, but that's not what's going on. And that becomes a lot easier for us to sort of negotiate that and to resolve that. If we can't figure that out, then it becomes harder. I lost my train of thought there totally. I'm sorry. Um, so coming from a place of ownership, uh, part of what makes well, you're always, and that you comes across as very pointy, puts other people on the defensive. If I'm thinking something, you don't need to get defensive about what I'm thinking, usually speaking. And the last idea to sort of decrease to de-escalate situations is stroking. And stroking is just finding positive things about the other person and telling them those positive things. And again, ethically, I want to encourage you not to do this in a false way, not to be malicious or sarcastic. You want to be genuine when you do these things, and people often can figure it out or sense it. And if you're being disingenuous, that will make things harder, not easier. So being focused on being genuine in your stroking and telling them the positive things about them will help. And what how it helps is, again, it's hard to be upset at someone who keeps saying nice things about you. So and if you can get them de-escalated, then you can start moving on to other things like negotiating in a principled manner. So if you're the seneschal of a group and you've got three factions and each faction has different idea about what the core theme of the event should be, how do you do that? Well, the first thing to do, the very first thing, is to separate people from the problem. So, and you see this at events where, like, Duke John wants to, run a heavy tournament with lots of pomp and circumstance and stuff, and Mistress Joanne wants to do an A&S themed something, and Bob the Archer wants to do, a children's shoot, and right, and we get tied to Bob and whatever I named the Laurel and the Knight, all like we get tied to the person instead of the idea. And so the first thing we want to do is pull those apart and put the ideas up somewhere so we can say, okay, so let's talk about doing a heavy list. Let's talk about archery. Let's talk about an A&S component. And then we want to focus on interests, not positions. Focus on like, okay, so well, we want to help the A&S community. We want to help children, archery, the heavy fighters. Like, who are the people that are going to be impacted by this? Sometimes in the corporate world, this would be finding key stakeholders, I think. So we want to get focused on what the different interests are. We want to generate a lot of possibilities. We want to come up with like, okay, so could we, how do these ideas interact? Is it possible to do all three? If it's not possible to do all three, what are the different possibilities? If we do the heavy list that we're talking about here, does that take over the whole event and there's no room for anything else? Or can we do something else, find other ways? One of the things that I will do when people are struggling with ideas is I'll say, okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to come up with 5 bad ideas, just 5 awful, horrible ideas. And so we start just listing off ideas like, well, we could choose not to have the event. We could, we come up with bad ideas. And then we keep generating more ideas after that. Part of the idea there, part of what you're doing there, is that by generating the bad ideas first, we're generating the ideas without evaluating whether they're good or not. And so being able to just say, well, here's a bunch of ideas and just throw out the ideas. And once you've got them out there, then you can start evaluating them. And when you start doing that, we want to insist that the results are based on some sort of objective standard, something measurable, something that everyone can kind of see and agree on. So, it might be saying, okay, so A&S, heavy fighting, children's archery, which one's going to get the greatest draw? which one historically gets the greatest draw, which one has the most draw per or cost per person that would be drawn in. Like lots of different ways to evaluate that to set your standard, depending on what your values and goals are. And that's again something that the groups might want to discuss, and you might find out, oh, well, different people have different goals and different values, and they're going to value things differently. So but you keep working through that process, and hopefully the more you work through that process and the more you do that with your groups, the easier that will become. So how do we deal with arguing? First thing, and absolutely the biggest thing, is a quiet, slow, calm voice. One of the things that happens when people start arguing is, I raise my voice, you raise your voice, I raise my voice, boom, 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 right? Interesting thing is that the absolute difference between the two people is always the same. So if we're elevating and I lower my voice and I just keep it here quiet and slow, and this is really uncomfortable. This is unusual. People don't like this. And so what tends to happen is they lower their volume to maintain that absolute distance. So if I'm talking quietly and softly and you're talking, at a more normal tone of voice, it's hard to be upset when you're talking in a normal tone of voice. And this is useful for a couple different reasons. So first, if I'm paying attention to my volume, my tempo, it's hard for me to get upset. And it doesn't require that I say anything smart. It doesn't require that I be particularly intelligent or clever. I just have to focus on the volume and tempo. So it's accessible. It is useful for managing my own emotional reactions to things. It helps change the other person, bring them down to a level. So that's useful. And if everything goes sideways and anyone's watching, some person yelling at me while I'm talking quietly, what are they going to see? They're going to see crazy person yelling at John, the calm guy. So the next two come with a slight bit of caution, because these are techniques that I learned in my parenting classes. And so they can be useful, but they can also be challenging, difficult. They can backfire, I suppose, is really what I want to say. So the first is a broken record approach. And so when someone's like, I'm going to, you're just like, I'm not going to argue with you. I'm not going to argue with you. And you just keep repeating, I am not going to argue with you, over and over again. You do not say anything else. You just say, I am not going to argue with you. Now, this works great the second time. The first time, you usually have to say it a whole bunch of times. Now, here's the problems. Here's the caveats. This is a parenting technique, and part of what that relies on is a power differential. That if you're trying to argue with me and you expect to be treated like a peer, and I go, I'm not going to argue with you, I am asserting a power difference between us. And that can be really upsetting. Whether the person sort of puts it cognitively that way, they put it together or not, they still experience that like, no, John was just right. So that can be a real potential downside of this, is that it has that power dynamic thing that can be really discomforting and it can piss people off. So you want to be attentive to how you use that. The other one that's probably better is called an empathetic response. And so the other person, John, blah, 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 and they come in, and I'm like, wow, you sound really pissed off. Or I'm not going to deal with whatever they're saying, like whatever the fencers did this, or the equestrian people are doing this. I'm like, wow, you sound upset. And I'm just going to respond to their feeling, to what they're saying emotionally, rather than factually. And if I'm lucky, they're going to say, yeah, I am really pissed off. Like, okay, so tell me about what's going on with that. Tell me, and work them through the feeling. And I'm going to do that with the active listening, just responding and like, usually you don't actually have to do all that much with that sort of thing. Um, it's sometimes surprising in my job. Like I just sit there, smile, and go, "Wow, that sounds hard," for like an hour, and then the people are like, "Wow, that was fantastic. Thanks, John. I feel so much better." Okay, bye. People want to be heard, and when they feel heard, they can often resolve the issue themselves. So the empathetic response is about helping people move from the surface level issues to what's really going on, what's driving that, which is the emotional stuff. Um, yeah, I'm gonna just have myself a little drink. So, next topic, setting limits. Um, and so setting limits is basically just a fancy way of saying no. I didn't go to grad school for nothing. Um, but what we're going to do is we're going to take how we would normally say no and we're going to flip that on its head. So rather than saying no and then explaining the reasons, we're going to flip that on its head and start by saying, all right, so I understand that this is what you want. However, here's my situation. So I'm not going to be able to do that. Now, ideally, so the example here I actually kind of like. I know they asked me to cook lunch for the event, but I'm already committed to marshaling and running tournaments. So I'm going to have to ask you to find someone else to cook lunch. Right? That by the time I get to this part where I'm saying no, you're getting what I'm asking for, or I'm acknowledging what you're asking for, giving you the issues that I'm struggling with when I say no. Now, a couple different things can happen here. First, it might be that I did not understand what the person was asking for. It might be that they're saying, no, John, I don't need you to cook the lunch. I just need you to acknowledge that you're going to like sign off because you have the license for the state that we need so we can get the site so that Joe can cook the lunch. He's going to do the lunch. We just need to use your license or whatever. It might be that they're like, oh, I didn't know you were already doing that. Can we get Joe to do that? To run the lists because he can do that, but he can't cook for anything. It'd be better for us if you did the lunch and Joe cooked or ran the cooking the list. It's not really what you want to do. So hopefully that makes sense. So assertive statements. So how do we ask for the things that we want? And again, we're going to sort of reverse our normal order of things. We're going to start with the facts, things that are objectively true. So here's what I see. Here's what's going on, as factual as possible. Like if someone was like watching through a window, what would they see? Then we want to talk about our feelings, how we feel about the issue, our concerns, our anxieties, our worries. Being careful not to let thoughts masquerade as feelings. I feel that you're not listening. We don't want that. I'm worried. I'm upset. I'm scared. Um, and then the fair request, what we are asking for, being as specific as we can. So hopefully that will sort of fit in there. And then lastly, I want to say lastly, yeah. Tips for letting go of irreconcilable differences. In the SCA, we run into a lot of people, and there are going to be some people we just don't get along with. There's just nothing to do about that. So how do we deal with that? How do we let go of those differences? First, we want to ask ourselves, if the other person, their position, what they believe is, well, contrary to us, does it really impact us? And the answer probably is no. But if it doesn't, then it's probably go, well, they can think what they want. I'm going to think what I want. Let them move on. If it does, if what they believe does impact us, what can we do to minimize that impact? How can we reduce that? It might be to find a way to avoid them at events or to try to figure out how to go with a friend so that the friend can support you if you have to deal with them, something like that. You may need to get a neutral third party to help you find a middle ground. So that's sort of the end of what I've got. Um, and so you know what? It's been 50 minutes, give or take. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to end this here, and I might plan on doing this again and hopefully figure this out a bit better. But thanks for coming, everyone. I'll talk to you soon.